Great, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Justin Hunt, and I am the moderator for session 4. For those of you who have been with us for the day, welcome back. And for those of you who are just joining us, we are delighted to have you. We've had a really exciting day with really interesting papers and presentations across the day. And we've really enjoyed everything so far, and we're excited for our final session today. A reminder to everyone that recording is on for those who have nominated recording, and we will pause when people have requested it not to be recorded. We have interpreters with us today, Megan, Catherine, and Bibi. If you need to use interpretation, feel free to pin them. If you have any concerns or questions about not being able to engage with interpreters, please use the chat function. That way, those of us who are helping to organize and moderate today can support you. Throughout the session, you have an opportunity to use the Q&A function. That's where you can put in any questions or comments to the session speakers. And indeed, if something's come to your mind from session 3, we didn't have a lot of time to do a Q&A for session 3, please put that into the Q&A as well. We'll try to use the time at the end for that. For our panelists, a reminder to speak slowly to support interpretation. And I will be timing you, and it's close to your time. I will come on screen to say you have 5 minutes, and I promise not interrupt you too much. Use the chat function, everybody, for any general comments, but Q&A for questions and comments. We have 3 speakers in this session, and I'm delighted to introduce them now. For speed, I'm just going to say their names and its paper title. First, we have Izzy Barrett-Lally, whose presentation is titled Queering Autobiographical Memory, Emotional Analysis of Goodreads Book Reviews for Subgenre Recognition. Following Izzy's presentation, we'll have Sarah Jane Field, whose presentation is titled After the Binary, AI and Greenberg in 2024. And our final speaker for this session will be Caleb Weintraub, whose presentation is titled Charting the Human-AI Creative Continuum, a Personalized Navigation. I will go off screen now and let Izzy begin.
Thank you. Hello, I'll just share my screen with you all.
You're very quiet, Izzy. Sorry, I'm not sure if it's possible for you to fix your microphone.
Yeah, I've got an external microphone, so I'll plug it in. But before when I had it in, it was stopping my sound for some reason, but I can try it and just...
We can hear you much better now when you're closer to the computer where we can hear you great.
Can you hear me? Is that okay?
That's great. Back to Izzy.
Hello? I think I'm just going to change my mic settings again. Sorry about this.
We can hear you now. It's great.
Okay, cool. Thanks. I think it's my microphone that was throwing off the sound. I'll try and stay close to the machine. Hello, I'm really happy to be here today and really happy to be sharing my work with you on querying autobiographical memory based on a study that I ran using emotional analysis of Goodreads book reviews in order to investigate subgenre recognition. So I'm going to present the method to you that I developed to study how readers recognize autobiographical subgenre. It's a method that I tested in my thesis in an emotional analysis experiment in order to investigate a subgenre of autobiography that I'm coining in my thesis called auto-memoir. And auto-memoir is autobiography, according to my definition that I've developed. It's a sort of autobiography in which there is no real truth claim, as you'd expect in conventional or traditional autobiography, but there's a claim instead to difficult truth and to the complexity of truth. And so my experiment was looking to see whether this is a subgenre that readers recognize in their emotional responses. So I mapped emotional responses from a large number of book reviews onto my definition and the textual features that I've identified of this hypothesized subgenre. So today I'm going to share the method with you that I used and also discuss to today's theme how I think this method could support the ongoing development of inclusive and representative literary analysis. And the reason that I wanted to combine my own textual analysis of autobiographies and my judgment on what might constitute a schism, right, a divide of genre, with book review data that I've processed and generated using book reviews, is in order to democratize literary analysis and try and incorporate more responses and to reflect this in my own textual analysis. So that's the kind of the drive of what I'm doing with this work. So I'm going to present my research questions to you and the hypothesis that I tested in my experiment into reader recognition of auto-memoir. So I've already given you a quick definition of auto-memoir, but I will also just say that this definition, just to give you the origin of this definition, it's one that I adapted from Lejeune's definition of autobiography. So back in the 90s, French scholar Philippe Lejeune, first formalized autobiographical studies, and he took the definition from the French Laroze dictionary. So it's quite a common sense idea of how we conventionally think of autobiography as a text, and Lejeune defines this as a text in which there is a contract between the writer and the reader, that the writer will attempt to give the truth about their life to the best of their ability. So that's Lejeune's idea of autobiography. In auto-memoir, there is no singular, there's a multiple truth, which is what I'm arguing for here. So this method uses, I'm going to talk about my methods and talk you through my results. The method uses emotional analysis powered by machine learning of reader reviews that I took from Goodreads to investigate how readers perceive problematic autobiography. So auto-memoir is problematic autobiography because it's a kind of compositional autobiography. So it combines features of more than one genre. In this case, it may appear fictionalized and seem to stray from objective truth, which is the standard that we hold for an autobiographical text. So when a text seems invented, and we may conventionally say that this makes a text less autobiographical. So auto-memoir would be less autobiographical. And auto-fiction, which is a recognized subgenre of autobiography, more widely spoken about and written about by French critics, and more prevalent as a critical term in French scholarship and French culture than it really is here, is a sort of a form of autobiography in which there is a fictionalization of the narrative. And I'm also studying auto-fiction as a control group, which I'll get into in my methods shortly. So we have these three different autobiographical subgenres: autobiography, auto-memoir, auto-fiction. And so, as I was saying, when a text seems to be less truthful, conventionally we might say that it makes it less autobiographical. And this is precisely the idea that I'm challenging with this work, because I've noticed that minority, and this is the kind of the argument that I'm developing in the expansion of this work that I've done, I've noticed that minority experiences often find expression in compositional and non-traditional autobiography that doesn't conform to these standards of genre as per Lejeune's definition. And I'm interested in this relationship between expressions of queer and other minority experience and auto-memoir and auto-fiction. So, for example, and so this is looking towards the next steps, really, and how these methods could be applied to investigating the corpus, potentially, for auto-memoir and auto-fiction, and how readers perceive these subgenre. So, for an example, one text that I used in my study was Edouard Louis' En finir avec Eddie Bellegueule. En finir is to finish with, and Eddie Bellegueule is the childhood name of the writer Louis. And this is a text in which Louis describes, it's a story of his childhood and adolescence, growing up in a rural northern French, very working class community. And the working classness of it isn't what makes it miserable. Working class doesn't have to be miserable, but it's that Louis faces homophobia in his community and in his family, and other struggles in terms of his identity and his relationships within his community. And ultimately, Louis wins a scholarship to go and study at a specialist drama high school, lycée. And so he's able to leave this community, and it's the end of Eddie, as it's called in English, is the story of this struggle. So this was an example of autofiction that I used in my study. So for my research questions, there are two types of research question that I addressed. The first is a methods question, as I've been describing. Is it possible to identify autobiographical subgenres based on patterns in emotional intensity scores generated by AI? So these intensity scores are an element of the method that I'll describe to you. Then a content question: is auto-memoir a recognizable autobiographical subgenre? And another methods question: does emotional analysis provide the foundations for a representative and inclusive method of literary genre analysis? And I'll make some suggestions about this and open this up to discussion and criticism of possible design for these methods and the ethics around the development of methods using reader emotional responses of readers. So my hypothesis isolated three emotions that I predicted would be pertinent to the divergence that I predicted in reader responses to these three subgenres that I included: auto-memoir, auto-fiction, autobiography. I anticipated that auto-memoir texts would generate the lowest intensity scores for trust, anticipation, and surprise across the proposed subgenre. Trust, because the truth standard varies across the subgenres according to the definitions, and in the case of auto-memoir, we're dealing with a multiple and complex truth. Anticipation, because was one of the emotions that I isolated for my analysis, because the way in which the writer engages the reader in interpretation varies across these subgenres, and the reader is more implicated in the interpretation when there is no singular narrative, but instead a looping and self-contradicting, a narrative that loops around and contradicts and offers alternative interpretations, as is the case with auto-memoir. Surprise, because of the use of techniques like foreshadowing that are more prevalent in fictional genre. And this one was a little bit unexpected, the results that I got for surprise, that I will show you in just a second. And it's worth saying as well that I was primarily, although I was working with this hypothesis, and I think that it's worthwhile to develop, as an individual, develop ideas about, as a singular kind of person, develop ideas about textual features and their relationship to genre in this case. It's also worth pointing out that I wanted to explore the data and look to see fundamentally whether patterns were recognizable in these groupings of subgenre, rather than focusing or being too led by my expectations about specific emotions, but to really just look at this as a method that is viable. So the last, as I mentioned, the last research question is really a discussion point.
This is Justin speaking. You have 5 minutes, okay?
Oh, okay, thank you. So let me show you some results then. The methods, I think a lot of you are probably quite familiar with the methods, so I'm not going to go into detail on those, except to say that I used a large number in my data gathering of review texts. I took 15,000 review texts, so that was 5,000 for each proposed subgenre. There are interesting discussions that I'm going to make at the end, I think, about the training and how the training of models could be also a point of reflection into how the training data is produced and how this might reflect diverse emotional responses to literary texts. And it's also important to note about my choice of Goodreads that these review texts are unstructured and unprompted, which I think makes them suitable for using for studying spontaneous emotional response. But again, this is a point that you might want to challenge me on and discuss further. So, as I already mentioned, I did an exploratory analysis. This was to look at variance and distribution. And I also wanted to use clustering to test the validation of my hypothesis. But throughout, I wanted to look at the overall picture of the data. And I'm going to show you a plot that does that, a multi-dimensional scaling plot. So we can go through this. I did use Go Emotions, if you want to ask me about that. So let's have a look then. I hope I've got 2 minutes to show you some graphs and make a couple of final comments. So for the autobiography text, we do see groupings around the emotions I was interested in: anticipation, trust here, there's a grouping here, and surprise. These means are using normalized data. So I've normalized it to try and look at variance over distribution in this data, so that we can see the patterns more clearly. We have outlying text, as you'd expect. There's, for autofiction, weaker patterns and less evident groupings within emotions. As you would expect, I think, with anything fictionalized, there's more potential for the manipulation and production of responses in the reader, I think, through a range of technique and sort of literary style. And then the auto-memoir that I was interested in testing for. So I'll show you that the trust is much lower as expected, and we have a much lower anticipation, notably so here. And then the surprise is higher, which I think could be to do with the fact that there is really no commitment to singularity in auto-memoir text. So we can see the averages for the three subgenre here, which just summarizes what I've shown you there, looking at trust, surprise, and anticipation. So very low anticipation within the auto-memoir group, and the lowest for trust. So to summarize, and then I'll just bring up my scaling plot. There's 30 seconds left at the end. Thinking about then the potential applications of these methods, I think that to compare emotional intensity scores for proposed examples of auto-memoir and autofiction that feature queer and minority experiences against existing data sets would support the continued exploration and proposal of autobiographical subgenre that invites what is problematic and don't attempt to deproblematize, but really reproblematize by inviting or by creating a recognition of how these texts are autobiographical, and therefore I think validating the life stories in these texts. So that's an area that I'm interested in working with. As I mentioned previously, production of training data sets could be something that might be democratizing, and there are various ethical considerations, but I think potentially this is something that could make literary analysis techniques around genre more representative, and to continue to apply grounded theory to new book review data sets to produce more data, more training data, more raw data, possibly using crowdsourcing, I think is an exciting possibility for this sort of technique, and to explore how the emotional responses of real readers map against these traditional categories of genre that are the products of institutions of literary criticism that no longer entirely map onto the literate population, the thinking and experiencing population, reading population. So those are three possible areas, I think, for application. And if I've got 30 seconds, I'll show you a plot at this time. Here's my last slide. So let me see. Where have we gone? Oh, you can see that. Can you see the plot?
Yes.
Okay, great. So this is a prototype, and what you're seeing is the points for all of my data. It's quite clumped together because it's using normalized scores. So an improvement I need to make is probably to use the scores that haven't been normalized. But I'll just show you some of the one or two of the emotions of interest. So here we go. So we've got autobiography. They should be labeled. This is a prototype. We've got autobiography here in red. So what we're looking for really is any kind of clustering or grouping that might be immediately apparent. And I mean, it takes a while to sort of play with them and have a look, but I think here, I should explain, this is showing the similarity between emotional intensity scores in review texts of these three genres. So this is just to give you an idea. I'll show you one more.
We can't do one more just for time, but thank you so
Yes.
much.
But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you so
Sorry,
much, Izzy. While we're waiting, please do consider putting any questions or comments from the papers we've already heard into the Q&A. Thank you for those who already have. And again, if you were here for session 3 and have some lingering questions or see connections between the sessions, please go ahead and put comments or questions inside the Q&A for that as well. I noted there was some really beautiful connections between the previous 2 papers and session 1 today, for instance.
Justin, if it's helpful, I can probably start even without slides. Maybe I can just begin introducing myself.
That'd be great. Thank you so much, Caleb. I'll go off screen.
Okay. Hello, I'm Caleb Weintraub. I'm an associate professor and director of undergraduate studies at the Eskenazi School of Art, Architecture, and Design at Indiana University in the U.S. I'm primarily a studio artist, a kind of painter, and I've been working with AI tools for the past several years. And my perspective on AI and the integration of these tools with studio practice has evolved over time. I had an initial, I would say, defensive knee-jerk reaction in which I was, I think, protective, and I tended to privilege human intelligence, and that position has been evolving over time. And I think that all these disruptive technologies usher in periods of anxiety and unrest and confusion, but also excitement. It's a moment in history that requires cultural, ideological, and also personal adaptability. I'm mostly interested in the intersection right now of human creativity, excuse me, and AI, and how the impact of AI is transforming not just the way we sort of perceive the world around us, but also the way we think about expression and authorship. So I want to talk about some of those items. Just out of curiosity, is the presentation available to be seen yet?
Any word? This is Justin.
I am trying to share it now. I've just passed it to Retno to see if she can share it. For whatever reason, I'm not able to share.
Okay, I'll just continue speaking, and then I'll just indicate if there's a slide that I think would be worth going back to.
We appreciate your support there.
Oh, sure, it's totally fine. So during the 2020 pandemic lockdown, I had begun, okay, thanks, great. So if it's possible to go to slide 2, or actually, I guess it's slide 3. Yeah, the next one, please. Yes, perfect. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. So yes, during the lockdown, I started experimenting with language models to provide feedback on new paintings I was working on. So during that time, I was making artwork by just splashing around colors and trying to tease out or excavate imagery from those colors. It was not a premeditated kind of process. And because I was improvising, I didn't quite know exactly how to talk about the work or how to think about the work. And in 2020, these language models were fairly rudimentary, but I decided to confer with the model and ask it to interpret some of the work. And I was impressed at the sort of level of nuance. So I'm showing just one example of a painting and an anecdote. So in my conversations with this language model, I asked why the model thought I chose to make the image fragmented and somewhat difficult to read. There is a figure in there, but it's quite it's overstimulating. And the model replied that it thought that the artist likely made the image fragmented and challenging to read to give the viewer a sense of what the figure in the painting might be experiencing as they're disoriented by this apparent snowstorm. So I thought that observation was somewhat in line with my thinking. And that was the first indication that I had that these tools might be useful as sort of studio mates or studio partners to brainstorm and bounce ideas off of. Next slide, please. Thank you. In 2021, I co-taught a class called AI in the Studio. And this was sort of an extension of the personal experiences. And my co-instructor and I mostly just created an environment where students could experiment with a range of tools. And a lot of these students were working in material practices, or not necessarily physical material practices, but iterative practices. And the goal of the projects was to incorporate AI-assisted technologies in this kind of developmental phase and brainstorming rather than as ends in and of themselves, for the most part. And so we had students who were working in fiber arts and metals and performance and various disciplines. And it was an interesting experience, and also allowed for a great deal of access to various modes of creative output for people who may not have had a great deal of experience with art making in the past. The next slide, please. So at some point I came across this quote by Nathan Bashez on a blog, and I'll just read it. Writing gave words permanence. Typewriters reduced the friction between having a thought and transferring it onto a page. Computers reduced the cost of editing thoughts after you type them. The internet made it possible to send your words anywhere instantly for zero cost, and now AI will help you think through ideas more completely as you type them. Next slide, please. As an extension of that, one might say painting immortalized visual. This is mainly coming from a visual artist's perspective, but I'll just read this. Painting immortalized visual expressions, brushes refined imagination, canvas canvas connection. Sorry, let me just read this. Imagination and canvas. Photography captured moments with precision. Digital art broadened the creative spectrum. The internet enabled global sharing of artistic visions instantaneously and without boundaries. Generative AI is allowing people to visualize ideas with clarity, depth, and imagination. So, and these are AI-generated images that would be, sort of, they were meant to be playful, but it does show the kind of range and possibility in terms of conjuring or manifesting images that would be challenging to imagine. And I think both of these quotes are, or these statements are aspirational. I think a lot of people would feel differently about the role of generative AI. There's certainly a potential for people to begin to over-rely on these systems. And I think a lot of us are probably in favor, to some extent, of outsourcing the tedious parts of our lives and our jobs. For me, that could be inventories and Excel sheets and data entry. I'm happy enough to have AI handle those. But when we think of working together with AI to think through ideas, I think that is interesting and compelling, and that's one thing. But I also feel that it's possible that it could lead to a wholesale abdication of our creative autonomy, and that could be a slippery slope. Next slide, please. So I think because this is a rapidly evolving landscape, there's quite a bit of work to do in terms of understanding how we might integrate the technologies into various practices. I think while AI has been around for many decades and affecting our world, it's been mostly in the shadows until recently. But the recent advancement in AI is transforming many aspects of the creative field. And as AI becomes more integrated into everyday life, it raises philosophical questions about the nature of creativity, the role of technology in shaping human expression. For some artists and others, these models are already augmenting and enhancing our human creative capabilities. And this poses challenges to our traditional notions of authorship and originality. I don't think there's any one single answer about this topic, and I think people will have a range of reactions. But for some people, it's serving as an augmentation. As an example, in the bottom left and upper right images on the slide, choreographer Wayne McGregor has a project called Deep Stereo it leverages AI and acoustic research and physical and spatial computing to generate these dynamic, evolving, ever-changing choreographic works. And it stands as an example of how some artists are negotiating with technology. They're interacting with it, they're adapting it and folding it into traditional practice. Next slide, please. Thank you. There's, AI has had an impact on all the creative fields. It's in some ways it's been had a positive impact. So I'll talk about a couple of these. There's been some of these algorithms have helped to reduce packet loss, which enables people to play over the internet with close to zero latency or zero lag. And there are AI tools that automate mastering. They provide real-time feedback. Thank you. They provide real-time feedback. They enable tone transfer and increase people's ability to kind of experiment without having the sort of hindrances that sometimes come along with the sense that one might be being judged. On the flip side of this, there's also the unauthorized use of artists' work, and we might remember some examples. We can go to the next slide now, please. We might remember some examples from popular culture in which people's material was used. Sorry, I think it's a slide before. Oh, I'm sorry. That's correct. I apologize. Yeah, we can move on to the next slide. So, and there have been, unauthorized use of people's voices and artwork, and that creates conditions of challenges to people's ownership and their rights. So, AI is an evolving. As AI evolves, there are challenges toward bias and deepfakes, as I mentioned with the music, and it impacts the social fabric. There's a case, if we look at the bottom left image here, of an early language model. This was called Sydney, Microsoft's Sydney, and it was trained on a lot of social media, and those interactions tend to be relatively volatile. And so because of that, the model performed a lot of those kinds of behaviors. It was short-tempered. It often communicated with angry emojis and various kinds of volatile material. And it's an indication that all these models are only as good as the data that they're based on. The next slide, please. So there are a number of artists who are addressing some of these issues through integrating AI with their work. Stephanie Dinkins addresses AI and race and the intersections with society. Trevor Paglin uses AI artwork to critique AI visual recognition and surveillance and data categorization. We can move to the next slide, please. And so there's going to be a range of responses to the integration of AI in creative fields. I think this sort of breakdown that I've imagined is that there are, on one extreme, there are the Luddites, those who would resist AI, who feel that it threatens human creativity and authenticity. There are skeptics who have concerns about job displacement and trademark or IP issues, who feel that this technology will compromise human touch. There are people who are somewhere in the middle, who are maybe have a balanced approach and maybe feel that it's inevitable, so they'll adopt it due to pressures of the marketplace. There are enthusiasts who embrace AI for its ability to augment and enhance our creative abilities. There are transhumanists who take an even deeper position on the integration of these tools with our human approaches. And then there are post-humanists who feel that AI will evolve into a sort of blurring of human machine lines. Okay, we can move to the next slide. I think in some of the way that we've thought about artwork in the past is that artists are creating these discrete objects. So in this analogy, on the left side, it would be like a painstaking painting, and on the right side, maybe a bonsai tree. And I think this would be a symbol of moving away from thinking of art as these productions, individual efforts per se, and more toward a kind of organization or a high level creative decision process. So creating conditions for creativity to exist, taking a lot of outputs, maybe AI generated outputs, organizing them into a coherent vision. And I think this shift away from these individual labor intensive projects toward something that is more akin to curatorial or production avenues is likely to take place. Okay, thank you. We can move to the next slide. And in the interest of time, actually, we'll move to the next slide as well. Oh, sorry, I think it's the slide before that. Yeah, just one before that. So there are artists who are using AI as, creative extensions. This is an example of Holly Herndon is a musician who trains AI on her voice and on her timbre and creates really innovative compositions, and also allows her voice to be used by other artists, which results in interesting and unpredictable results. Sugwen Chung collaborates with AI-powered robotic arms and swarm robots to create unique artworks, often ink paintings. Jake Elwes on the upper right has a project called the ZZ Project. He uses AI-generated deepfakes to create a synthesized drag identity that examines the intersection of AI, gender, and bias. And on the bottom right, Ross Goodwin has a project that involves a fine-tuned language model connected to a camera that was perched on the back of his vehicle. And that system then narrated its own cross-country journey based on the camera input, in that way, and thereby sort of merging the technology with storytelling. We can go to the next slide. I think I'm in my last few remarks. So I think having experimented and spent a good deal of time working with these technologies, my own reaction has been that I've found that initially when these first hit, they were in a rudimentary state, but I could imagine that these would become extremely productive very quickly. They would create high caliber results and at high volume. And at first, I thought this would create a bit of an existential crisis as a maker. But it became sort of immediately apparent that the reason why I make is more the process than the product, and regardless of the result, whether it succeeds or it doesn't succeed, or whether it has any value, I found that I would still want to make work no matter what. And I think part of the kind of what we're left with in some ways, even if AI can achieve a great deal more than humans can achieve in some metric, I think it doesn't have any ability to sort of access our experience, and our experience still remains valuable. And I think there's also this other dimension, which is the sort of embodied experience and the physical dimensions of the material that we use when we're making certain kinds of artwork, and that there are many valid approaches to art making, including AI practices, but there are unique characteristics to physical material artwork that is becoming potentially like more desirable, maybe easier to appreciate, more exotic, and worth valuing. Okay, I think I can stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caleb. And if we can stop sharing the slides now, as we can bring all of the panelists back on. Wow, so if you want to go ahead and put your screens on, those who aren't already. My screen so I can actually see you all. Welcome. Thank you all so much for that. I thought there were some really amazing critical conversations with AI occurring there. across each of those presentations. And while people are getting their ideas into a chat function, into the Q&A, questions or comments, I wanted to take some time to think with you a little bit about what I heard. And it's been interesting to me to hear each of you have, as I said, a critical conversation with the engagement with AI. And indeed, it felt that we were sort of after something, each individually with AI, in terms of our artistic process or our engagement with an art form or a genre of of making. And I was interested in the questions of cost. At what cost are we after such things? There seemed to be a connection there for me across each of the presentations and papers. We heard sort of this question of what it meant to train reflection in Izzy's. We had this question of production of an alien kitsch other in Sarah Jane's. And with Caleb's, we had this question of sort of this space between the improvisational and the interpretive that somehow allowed for a conversation with something other to enable us to go forward. I'm interested in what you heard between one another, where you saw congruencies, and maybe thinking a little bit about where and how the kind of structures of AI enable or disenable the things you're after. That was a big question and kind of meandering. So I understand if you don't have anything right there really fast, but please feel free to come on off of mute. And just for the interpreters, can you please say your name before you speak? Sarah.
Sorry, I didn't want to push in.
That's fine.
In terms of cost, I think if I'm honest, I'm constantly questioning and doubting and wondering. I don't spend all day, every day, churning out images. I think one of the issues with the enjoyment that some people are having is that they are doing that. I don't know how people have the time to spend as much time on Twitter or social media as they do. I mean, people. So I think we have to remember that this conversation is a really privileged conversation, and we're all sitting here having this, talking about things that most people on this planet don't think about. They don't have time. They're too busy trying to survive. So it's up to people who have the capacity, not the capacity, but have been afforded that privilege to push these conversations forward. And the cost may be too great. And as one of the speakers before said, it all may collapse. It all may collapse. And then we'll have to figure out the next stage. So, it's difficult. I think I said it. I cut out a bit of mine, but I think I said it. There are no easy answers. And I think that's my problem with the rhetoric, is that people think there are easy answers and there aren't. You cannot escape this technology, because your banking's going to be, it'll be involved it already is involved in your banking. Search engines are all going to be AI. You can't escape it, so you have to interrogate it, but then you have to try and figure out some ethical line to toe. I don't know if that answers.
That's useful. Caleb, did you want to respond to that as well?
Yeah, this is Caleb talking. Yeah, I think at what cost is a great question. And I think for me, one of the problems is that because I engage with the technologies fairly often, I'm keenly aware of this sort of homogenization that happens, and the potential risk of losing marginalized voices, like sort of outlier cases. It just, those things just don't end up having enough volume in the data set, and so they don't kind of surface. And that to me can be kind of catastrophic on a creative and social sort of level. So I think another real cost is, in the beginning, there were a lot of overt biases that were clear. We could understand them, we could see them. They were really prevalent. I think the more insidious aspect is, and especially coming from a visual realm, it was clear, even just working with for the first few months of the technology, there was an aesthetic bias that was embedded, and that was basically because the predominant data that was in the system was from the West and from a certain kind of institutional version of what constitutes like harmony or whatever. And so all the sort of aesthetic decision making that's foundational, and that is in the brain. And unless you were to start from scratch, is really not much that can be done. So we have to be really critical about that, and that's the cost. And I think an extension of that is beyond the arts, in just culturally, as the edges, the rough edges, like I was talking about, the petulant AI, that was clearly problematic, and it was very easy to solve that in some ways. You change the temperature, have it look more at certain kinds of dialogue and interaction and less at other kinds. That is not an engineering feat, but what it shows is then as these systems evolve, they become somewhat more, I'll just put it in quotes, like neutral or neutral apparent. And we have a risk of then thinking of them as being sort of universal and objective and true and all-knowing, and that is also like, that's a cost, because if we see them as oracles, we're in for surprises, because these embedded kind of biases and challenges, we don't know how to detect them necessarily.
That makes me think of Sarah Jane's composted goop. I want to just, Lizzie, I want to hear from you as well, but I just wanted to point out what Left Winter has said in the Q&A. Left Winter has said, I'm interested particularly in collaboration. Sorry, yes, that's correct. And in particular, international mobility. In terms of cost, what price is the involvement of those in the Southern Hemisphere? Or is there little chance of vast amounts of the populations being left behind? I don't think necessarily looking for an answer. Feel free, panelists, to write an answer in the Q&A if you're interested, but I wanted to bring that into that moment. Izzy, did you have anything in thinking about? I was really interested in your question around training, because there's a whole bunch of stuff around cost there as well, but anything you'd like to add? You a little bit closer, please. I can't hear you.
Sorry,
That's perfect.
I have my external microphone that didn't have its day today, so it didn't work. Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to come in on privilege, picking up on Sarah Jones' point, and also on Caleb's points about cost and benefit, and hopefully say something to that question that we just had. I have a point in relation to privilege, or the question of privilege coming from literary studies and narrative analysis. Makes me think of D.H. Lawrence, the early 20th century English writer, who didn't really have any contemporaries or peers who were writing the same sorts of works as he was, because he was in the incredible position of having the luck to get, as a working class writer, of being able to publish his work and smuggle it into France and have it published in France. And the work was banned. Lady Chatterley's Lover, sorry, I should say, infamously banned Lady Chatterley's Lover in the UK. So this is an example of a fluke, like one of those things that shouldn't have happened in history. And what this really represents, if we just take that example of that literary biography, is the loss of potential there. So I see these methods as a way of potentially recapturing potential that isn't expressed in literary expression or responses to literary expression. And I like to think of Roland Barthes and this idea of writable and readable text scriptible, and the idea that when we read, we're also writing a text. So you put out, there are all sorts of institutions of publishing as intervened and prevented Lawrence, but ultimately allowed him to succeed in his literary career, that mean that there are limitations on what does get published. But it's also worth remembering that what gets read also bounces around and goes back into then what is written, and we're interpreting and writing as we read, if we take Barthes. So I think this idea, therefore, of not necessarily directly being able to intervene in relation to the canon, which is a question that I'm interested in terms of subgenre and how texts get lost when they're on the periphery between subgenre and express a type of experience, as I was talking about, that might not fit within the conventions of an established genre. So to bring that point around to cost and benefit and privilege in relation to cost and benefit, I think that in terms of using AI to capture and reflect and synthesize within literary criticism a wider range of perspectives is something that ultimately bounces back in the way that Barthes writes about in culture. So I think that that can do something about the direction of travel in terms of how we think about canon, how we define canon, which is very important at the moment because this has become an area of conflict as the university system has opened up, as we've seen. North-South, I think that when we have, to sum up that point, my final point on the cost benefit, I would also say that it almost resembles, if we think about those left behind, so this is a point about class, which I think everything can kind of come back to in a sense in cultural criticism. If we think about the idea of having got to a point where we're then considering as people able to produce AI art, criticize AI art, and be critics of these types of cultural productions, that is a position, and then we're able to question our privilege to do so, and then even renounce that privilege or have a discourse on that privilege, which is kind of meta to that discussion. In those instances, there are people who were not already participating, and it's almost like the idea of the luxury belief around being able to own and purchase a bamboo or a recyclable toothbrush. This is almost insulting when you think of it from a class perspective, because there are those who've never been able to access the basic discussion and conversation. So I would be hesitant, and I would advocate for thinking more slowly about how we choose to reflect on cost without thinking about democratizing benefits. So I would say in relation to North-South, there is a democratizing benefit there, that we have the infrastructure to expand, but with an ethical reflection that it kind of goes parallel to that in a kind of sidecar to these discussions that we've been having. So that's what I would sort of say about that.
Yeah, and there's some interesting connections between session 1 and session 3 with what you just said. I'm going to move to some questions from the Q&A.
Yeah, sorry, that was a long answer.
No, it's a great answer. Thank you so much. Izzy, this question's for you from Paul.
Oh, yeah.
Did you also look at data across different languages, or was it mostly in English?
Thank you for the question, Paul. That's a really good question. And I chose ultimately to restrict the study that I ran to English, but I think that it depends on the sorts of texts that are being studied. And a problem, I think just a practical problem, is being able to match, to identify the origin of the review data. So it's sometimes unclear which language a reviewer may have read the book in, which edition. The language of the review might not match the language of the text that they read. This might not be specified. So it becomes very thorny very quickly. And another thought about that as well is that I think this is a valid and worthwhile avenue of exploration in order to just generate some sort of data to start trying to investigate maybe differences and to look at those differences in terms of how autobiographical text, for example, any literary genre might be perceived within certain regions. But I would say that a consideration also is about the burden of training multiple models. So if I had done that in my study, I would have had to have trained more than one model. So I think that's a consideration there too, but also an opportunity. Absolutely, yeah.
Interesting. This is so interesting in relation to each of you had something to think about in terms of compositional genre, because each of you were trying to go beyond maybe a set genre that you're used to working with, or maybe it seemed to me anyway. Next question is to Caleb. Caleb, Alice asks, do you think AI's incompetencies allow for the ability to discern what it is that you're trying to create? For example, when AI generation gets it wrong, it pushes you further towards what you want to achieve from an idea by the process of elimination.
Yeah, so this is Caleb talking. That is a question that's very much down my alley. I think that's exactly right, that we have a hard time, many of us have a hard time knowing what we like in anything. But we have a little bit of an easier time knowing what we don't like. And so I think that using the AI as this like an extremely rapid iterative tool, whether it be for writing or video or image or sound, these we're able to kind of cherry pick and kind of A/B test a lot of this. And yeah, I'm working on a tool with some colleagues that is focused on this kind of fine tuning element that allows people to have this reinforced learning loop, like a feedback loop, which will ultimately be a tool that will be customized so that people can do that more quickly and build these banks of data, which is sort of an open source project, the banks of data, because in order for a tool to be customized to your own tastes and help you develop your tastes, it needs a ton of data. And so as we move into an era, we're not quite there yet because of accessibility, but as we move into a time where the software and the hardware is readily available, people who are interested in having sort of a multimodal live recording constantly there, taking in everything we do, everything we see, everything we we put out there, that all that becomes data that if the privacy is correct, if it's protected properly, it can be used to build these customized, fine-tuned, sort of tailored tools that will enable artists to weed out exactly what we're talking, what that question goes toward, where weed out the things we don't like and find the things we do like, and hopefully that will then make allow people to kind of evolve rapidly without having to have access to who knows what kinds of personnel, people, cities, whatever. So yeah.
That's interesting. Justin speaking in relation to some of the sessions earlier and thinking about the kind of resource cost of producing any of this kind of work, and then the kind of globalized relationship that we might have in terms of what that type of access means, but also what that access and therefore privilege of use might disenable in terms of sociality. Sarah, I had a final question for you myself because I was really interested in a few things you said, but and this may be a stretch, but I was really interested in thinking about the alien in relation to your paper. I'm glad you laughed because that means that maybe you agree with me that there's something there that you want to say more about. And it may, I think it connects to actually the other papers as well, sort of this question of the alien, especially in terms of, Caleb, you brought in Wayne's choreographic work. There's something alien about that work. And there's, you brought in Bart, Izzy, and Bart is an alien to me in lots of beautiful and delicious ways. Sarah Jane, so I just actually want you to speak a bit more about the alien in relation to what you were thinking about. Is that okay? Is that an okay
That's
question?
fine. So I think, we've got such a fixed image of the human that it's falling apart, that image. It's threatened, it's under threat. So anything outside that fixed image is alien to us. We don't understand it. And we don't even have the language. So that's what, the alien is within us at the moment. And the technology is us. And there's like this kind of feedback loop between the media, us, and the alien within us, sort of fighting amongst themselves.
I just want to interject quickly on that because I think that's exactly what I was thinking when you said it. So I'm really happy you're articulating it this way because each of you seem to remind us that this technology is human.
It's us. It's not something else. It's not. I mean, everyone thinks it's something else, but it's not. It's just us. It's us, kind of out there, but also back inside. It's moving. It's an exteriorization of us that talks back to us. It's weird.
Oh yes. Oh, what a perfect way to end. Thank you, Sarah, for ending this on weird because today has been delicious and weird. I'd love to ask anybody who is still a panelist who's available is here to put their screens on. And I'm going to draw us towards a close. Thank you so much, Caleb, Izzy, and Sarah Jane for your outstanding presentations to close out our day. It was really, Tracy, we can't see you. There we go. It's been really exciting for me and really outstanding to hear from each of you. I think I'd like to first thank our interpreters for the outstanding work of making all of your outstanding thinking come into a different way, into understanding. I wanted to thank all the moderators for their time and their energy. I'd like to thank the entire committee that helped read through all the submissions and support Tracy and I in the kind of ultimate delivery of this, along with Venetia and Retno. Thank you so much. Tracy, I'm going to bring you on to talk about the after effects of the After AI Symposium, if that's okay.